This is April Van Buchen, and the topic for this PowerPoint is legal and ethical issues. We'll start with legal issues. Healthcare law is the collection of laws that have a direct impact on the delivery of healthcare or the relationship amongst people that deal with healthcare. So as this diagram shows, it could be healthcare providers, which would be like the doctors or physician assistants, nurse practitioners. Healthcare workforce would include nurses. Healthcare agencies would be hospitals, clinics, doctors' offices. Healthcare organizations would be larger entities like the Department of Health. Payers and payees, so payers would be insurance companies, right? And payees are anybody who receives money from an insurance company about healthcare. And consumers would be the patient or the people who buy healthcare insurance. So there are interrelated concepts here that we will cover during the course of your nursing program, and they will be healthcare policy, ethics, and healthcare economics. Usually, when we think of healthcare law, we think of people getting sued. We think of the term negligence. Negligence is when a nurse or a doctor or any kind of provider is liable or responsible for a fault that happened when they were taking care of a patient. So something happened or didn't happen, and it should have, and somebody was responsible for it, negligence. So this is one of the key terms for NSG 130. Negligence is defined as not performing duties expected or not performing duties to the standard expected. And this can also be called malpractice, and it could be either the employer or the employee or even both who's responsible, and one, the other, or both could also be charged with criminal charges. You see, healthcare workers have a responsibility to provide reasonable care. Reasonable care is care that another same qualified, licensed, prudent individual would perform. And if they do not provide this care, they have breached this responsibility or breached this duty. It's especially bad if a tort was violated and patient was injured. So that would be tort law, T-O-R-T-E. So if the patient was harmed at all. There are also other terms, such as standards of care, that are established by regulating agencies. Or in the case of NRN, the American Nursing Association, they have standards of care for us. We must perform our duties for those high standards in order to be considered competent. Once you are licensed, no one can say, no one ever told me this rule or regulation, because it is your responsibility to understand and abide by these standards, laws, and regulations. If you work in a hospital, there are rules and standards and policies that usually comply or match the standards of practice that the ANA or that the Department of Health put out. So you're constantly reminded and educated when things change. And that's almost like a favor, because if they didn't remind you, you would still have to know this stuff. It is ultimately your responsibility. So let's mention some other legal terms. There's battery. Battery is physical contact. Assault. Assault is threat to harm, whether it's implied or otherwise. And false imprisonment. Examples are this. If someone does not want to be treated, and you treat them anyway, that's battery. This could be as simple as taking a blood pressure. You have touched them without their verbal or written or implied consent. Now, if they walk into your emergency room and hold their arm out for you to take their blood pressure, then it is implied consent. But without consent, You can't touch them, or it's considered battery, which is against the law. Assault would be keeping them on treatment after they refused it. So you've threatened to harm them, right? False imprisonment is restraining a person for reasons that don't include their safety. So for your convenience. So the fundamental concepts they're all related. Everything is related to healthcare law, just like this diagram shows you. The scope of the concept. I like this little braid that's braided together. So there's legislation, which creates, changes, or cancels out laws. Repealing cancels out. Regulations, which puts laws in action because of rules. Rules are the same thing as regulations. So there are regulations governing nursing. Litigation. Litigation is a lawsuit. There are legal disciplines. So tort law is the law of medical liability. It is the legal discipline for anything that's malpractice. And in a previous slide, I said negligence fell under this umbrella. Negligence and malpractice are the same. For malpractice or negligence to occur, you must have 4 elements: duty, breach, causation, and harm. I had the duty to provide care. I breached that duty, which means I didn't provide care. I didn't do what I was supposed to. Causation means something happened to cause harm because I didn't do what I was supposed to. It's a failure to follow established standards of care and directly responsible for harm. So you can have negligence without malpractice. I forgot to give them their meds, and nothing happened. But if you forgot to give them their meds, and they had a seizure that caused them to fall on the floor and stroke out or bust their head open or break their hip, there you go. That's malpractice. Harm occurred. I hope this makes sense. So the profession of nursing establishes the standards of care. The profession of medicine establishes their standards of care. So there are unique characteristics of malpractice for every discipline. There's another type of law called contract law. So think of cost containment or insurance policy rates. There's contracts that govern that. There's property laws. There's constitutional law. So think of the American Disabilities Act. That's constitutional law. It protects patients. Equal rights protects patients. HIPAA. And then there are criminal laws. That's bad. That's when people do bad things on purpose. Some federal laws that you might be aware of. So Social Security Act, Patient Self-Determination Act, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, HIPAA. HIPAA is patient privacy. Then there's PPACA, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, and the Controlled Substance Act. We have to have that because of all of the controlled substances that are being sold on the streets. So those are federal laws. State laws. There are state laws that regulate all of these things on the slide. Okay, so all of these topics. So if you move to another state, you need to understand how your new state deals with these laws. Let's take licensing of professionals, their scope of practice. I'll use professional nursing, LPNs as an example. Okay, so actually all levels of nursing are regulated by each state. So VBON regulates RNs and LPNs. Nurses must hold a state-issued license to practice. The details of the practice and what they're allowed to do are found in the scope of practice for each state. So like LPNs, for example, licensed practical nurses can do quite a bit in Virginia. They can do almost everything in Virginia that an RN can do, except they can't do anything with blood products. They can't do anything with IV, total parenteral nutrition. They can't do anything with central lines. They can't give narcotics IV. So I'm telling you they can do a lot, but they can't do all of these things I just mentioned. They cannot assess a patient or provide education, but they can work in a hospital. They can give medications like pills and insulin. They can start an IV. They can do all kinds of skills. You go somewhere else. If you go to, they can take a patient load, but they can't assess a patient, so they have to have somebody assess the patient for them. If you go to Florida or California, a licensed practical nurse can't hardly do anything. They can maybe start an IV, but other than that, they function almost at the same level of a certified nursing assistant, because the Florida and California laws are very strict regarding nursing. So you have to know where you work, what state you work in, what you can do as a healthcare provider. The practices vary state to state. We have our Board of Nursing, so they're the ones that regulate nursing practice. They establish minimal standards. Another example of the State Board of Nursing establishing minimal standards, the state of New York wants to say that nurses must have a BSN by 2020 to practice nursing in the state of New York. Whether that will come to fruition and they will not accept associate degree nurses is another thing. But that's one of their goals. And they have the right to change their regulation to make that happen if they think they can, if they think their workforce is going to have enough BSNs there. So every state can have different rules. Just know that. Okay, now let's go to ethics. I love ethics. Ethics is the study of morality through a variety of different choices. And the ethical situations, they reflect an individual's values, beliefs, and just the core of their being. And I hope you know the core of their being, like their history of what they've experienced through their life. It's almost like adult learning. You bring with you a set of values and beliefs, and then you're taught some things, and it might alter your values and beliefs. It might not. It might make you more open to understand other people's values and beliefs. And in nursing, we have ethical decisions all the time, and we're faced with ethical problems all the time. And we have to somehow separate our values in order to handle these situations, and they're quite hard. Exemplars for ethics would be genetic enhancement, confidentiality, uncompensated care. What does that mean? That means, do I provide care if I'm not compensated? Heck yeah, you would provide. I would say you do. Conflict of interest. There's going to be lots of conflicts of interest. So I left this slide in. Ethics has so many interrelated concepts. You're going to have all of the legal things. So these law, policy, healthcare economics, and ethics are all part of the legal concept that you'll be covering. But then look at all these other concepts that hit on ethics, right? Professional identity, culture, spirituality, health disparities. All of these things deal with ethics. It's kind of cool. It touches on everything. So as you can see, there's many other interrelated concepts that deal with ethics. Ethics deal with so many components of a person's life. You have personal ethics, you have ethics with your employers, you have ethics as a family, things you do in front of your children because you want them to always do the right thing so you know the difference. And nurses, you have a certain facade about yourself as a nurse that has to portray maybe a different set of ethics than your personal beliefs. Think of ethics in abortion, the right to choose, versus maybe someone with strong religious beliefs against that. Think of ethics about giving a medication that's left over. Maybe someone went in the clinic and used an insulin pen a couple of times, and your employer tells you to throw it away. But it's almost full, and that patient can't hardly afford their medicine. Do you give them the medicine because you know it's going to be thrown away, or do you do what your employer wants you to do and just throw it away because the rule says throw it away? Ethical decisions, you'll encounter them as a nurse, I guarantee it. Oops, this slide's not showing you everything. Let me try to move it up. There we go. So, when we think of the scope of ethics and the different types of ethics that there are out there, there's societal ethics, which is ethical behaviors that keep you in line with laws and regulations, right? I don't steal because I'll go to jail. I follow the driving rules because those are regulations and I know the rules, right? So there are standards of behavior in which society is held accountable for. In nursing, there are legal standards that impact the ethics of a nurse. So there's clinical standards of care. There's liability. You are liable. If you set that vial of morphine down and that patient draws it up and injects themselves, you're the one that set it down, you're liable. It could be considered negligence, it could be considered malpractice if that patient dies. There are organizational ethics. Organizational ethics are the ethics that organizations are held accountable for, that guide their behavior. They guide behavior about decisions and actions taken by their members, and they pretty much direct all aspects of the organization. There are so many more types of ethics. You don't have to know all the different types, just know that they deal with everything. And as this slide shows, there's bioethics, clinical ethics, and research ethics. And then there's personal ethics. Personal ethics don't overlap perfectly with the societal ethics or with the clinical ethics, research ethics. Personal ethics cause a conflict when you're in an ethical dilemma, especially in nursing. Your personal beliefs, your personal values, your personal sense of ethics sometimes will challenge you when you have to take care of a situation that comes in conflict with this. An ethical dilemma is when an ethical problem has both aspects of right and wrong. So either side, you're going to do something right with either choice, but you're also going to do something wrong with either choice. An ethical problem is when the choice becomes very difficult. Examples. Advance directives are not followed by families because they want something else. So an advance directive is before somebody gets ill, they write out what they want to do in advance. Like if I get terminally ill with cancer, I do not want you to feed me. If I have a heart attack, I do not want you to do any life support. I just want to die peacefully. But my family doesn't agree with that and wants every single thing done. This is ethical and it's a legal issue. Maybe feeding me with cancer will get me through this bad stage and I have a 90% chance of recovery. So do you see how that could be ethical? An ethical dilemma? I have a chance of recovery. My family wants me to recover. But I said, don't feed me. There's some cultural diversity issues. If you care for a patient with a different value system than yours, there's going to be some ethical issues. Let's think about this, because this happens all the time, probably every day in the United States. not giving blood to a Jehovah's Witness patient. Jehovah's Witness people do not, I shouldn't say people, practitioners, do not believe in receiving blood. It is against everything they believe in. If it could save their life, you want to give them blood, maybe. Maybe, I'm just saying, if you think, why don't I just give them blood? It'll save their lives, they'll be happy. But they don't want that, so you have to abide by their wishes. Another ethical issue, taking care of criminals. When I was in nursing school, we had to, we were sent in this room, there were cops outside the door, and we were told to provide all the basic care and feeding to this patient. And we took care of him for about 2 weeks until we figured out who he was. He was the serial rapist, the longest standing serial rapist in the country, and he was injured in a high-speed chase where I went to nursing school, and we had to take care of him. It was an ethical, wow, our post-conferences were about ethics. They weren't about what we did to take care of him or any tasks or how to feed him or anything. I mean, he was in almost a vegetative state when we were taking care of him. But it was about how we felt, our personal beliefs, taking care of this person. So taking care of criminals. Nurses will encounter these dilemmas. I mean, I could go on with all kinds of stuff because I've seen so many things, and you will too. And so ethics will be a daily part of your careers. So another example. Sometimes to relieve suffering, some treatments are very, very painful. You have to balance the benefit of the benefit to the patient with the continuous suffering of getting the of having the treatment. The key to ethical analysis and decision making and understanding is communication. Communication, communication, communication. There are ethical principles. I just like the colors in this slide, that's why I'm showing it to you. There are ethical principles which help you view certain ethical dilemmas and how you take action. We always want courage, we always want compassion, we always want commitment. How you take action is determined by these ethical principles. So the first principle is respect for the person. In nursing, we have to respect the people we take care of. Maybe they are acting like they don't deserve respect, but we're going to give them respect. There's a term called non-maleficence. Do the least amount of harm. The least amount of harm. Beneficence. Good for the most people. Beneficence. I always come to my work background before teaching. So I ran the claims departments for many Blue Cross Blue Shield organizations. And we didn't pay for a lot of stuff. We didn't pay for a lot of experimental treatments, mostly because they weren't FDA approved. Even if it would save somebody's life, we didn't pay for experimental treatments because they were so expensive. It would drain the money that could pay for other people. So we used the ethical principle of beneficence. We needed to keep our pocket of money to pay for the most amount of people instead of sucking it dry with one person's experimental treatment. I hope I'm explaining that to where you can understand. But it's spreading the wealth of good as far as you can for more people. There's justice. That's an ethical principle. Justice. We want to treat everyone the same. We want to do what's just and right for everyone. Fidelity is important in nursing, and it is an ethical principle. It is keeping our commitments. If we told somebody we were going to do something, we better do it, because it's ethical. So there's ethics of duty, do the right thing. Ethics of consequence, greatest good for the greatest number. That could be the same thing as the beneficence example I gave with the insurance work that I used to do. Ethics of character, our life experience, and how do we reflect on our actions? How's our character? Ethics of relationship. So many things. Oops, I can't see all the slide. Failure to act ethically has been linked to serious dangers, professional burnout, and a lot of stress, worrying about, why didn't I do that? Why did I do that? Healthcare decisions that present ethical dilemmas don't have to be made by one person. Every healthcare organization has a compliance officer, has an ethics committee that gets together to help weigh the pros and cons, or the benefit versus the harm for any ethical decision. So people are not alone with ethical decisions. In nursing, here's some issues in nursing that involve ethical decision making. Protecting the patient's rights. Protecting the dignity of our patient. We want to do that, and we need to do that. It's ethical. Not respecting informed consent. They have to be informed. And you think, why aren't they going to sign the consent? Because at this point you just think about what the surgery they're in or whatever they're doing. But there are things we do that we may not tell them the risks or benefits of the treatment. Using restraints, that's a huge ethical issue. And in healthcare, we have a national nursing shortage, so we function sometimes understaffed. Is that truly ethical? Are we giving them the best care with how understaffed we are? Or maybe prolonging the life of somebody who doesn't want to live. There are lots of policies that could threaten the quality of care too. So some policies are unethical. Maybe they're to the financial benefit of the institution you work, but they might be unethical. Maybe you're working with somebody who smells like alcohol. But they're your friend. They're your coworker, but they smell like alcohol. That's an ethical decision, right? What if you're wrong? What if you're wrong and it was a medicine they took, or you just were wrong, you don't smell correctly? But still, it's an ethical decision. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening.